So, up top, there is going to be a bit of a spoiler warning for this. While I'm not doing any kind of full story dissection, I am looking at how the tone of the game has been tweaked and expanded. But that does still mean that there is a spoiler warning on this, though I'm not going to be delving deep into the lore, just the sort of general story beats, but avoid spoilers if that's your kind of thing. At many points playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was hit with the feeling of deja vu. I mean, it's a remake, it was bound to happen. But not just the feeling of having played these events before, but the sort of feeling you get when you're walking in a city and you suddenly realise you're walking past an establishing shot from a TV show you watch. The feeling in FF7 Remake wasn't just that I'd seen some of this stuff before, but now I was actually stepping into an environment I recognised from a previously top-down perspective. But Remake far from just reconstructs those top-down scenes. It felt like stepping past just a set and into the reality of the fiction itself. Not only does the game do a great job revisiting key characters, making them act and talk and behave like real people,
Shit.
but it doesn't skimp on doing the same thing for Midgar itself. It does this by making the stakes very clear, not just for Cloud and the gang, but for the regular citizens of Midgar as well, whether they be the more privileged topside inhabitants or those having to live in the slums of the Undercity. So, as you probably already saw, FF7 Remake just covers Midgar, and I was fine with that. I thought it did a great job of covering that portion of the game and building it into its own thing. And in the original game, it was a super memorable opening, but it did only take like 5 hours or so to get through at a push. Revisiting that PS1 original now, you can't help but feel like you're kind of skimming over a lot. Things are happening, but it doesn't always delve deep into why. You're just kind of rushed from one section to the next, and because you've got that sort of overview angle, it's kind of hard to always get a sense of exactly the minutiae of what's happening. You're just kind of going from one point to the next, which it was still great, don't get me wrong, but you know. So when it was revealed that Final Fantasy VII Remake would be focused entirely on Midgar, I was one of those fans that was gasping for more of that city. Because Remake is focused around this sort of realistic scale, by necessity, all of those bits that you kind of skimmed over before need to get magnified and built out in a way that doesn't just zoom in, but properly expands. I often found that change in scale made the game pass the walk test magnificently. I couldn't help but just stroll around some of those areas, taking it in, whether that be some of the settlements like the Sector 7 slums, which I spent far too long just strolling around, or even some of the sort of more dungeon-like areas. Occasionally I'd stop and walk over to a balcony and look at the just the whole environment around. It just looks great. It just really feels like you're there.
Honestly, they make us more money than this place. And it's easy money, too. We bring new filters, collect the old ones, and get paid. What?
Give me a break. I'm not a salesman. I'm a soldier.
Which is why no one will refuse to pay. What do you say? Please?
And because you feel like you're that much closer to the game the whole time, Remake has to deal with what happens with the story in Midgar in a closer way to match that. Rather than just do that in some kind of cursory way, Remake really leans into that to break new ground for the story. And it's not just at the beginning, but constantly throughout the game, the scale of what's happening can always be felt. So the first time you really get a sense of what FF7 Remake is doing with regards to that, though it's far from the last time, is in Chapter 2, and it's the part of the game that really sold me on just what it was that Remake was setting out to do, and for that reason I do sort of wish that the demo had continued on into Chapter 2 a little bit. Alas, it did not, but we're here nevertheless. So at this point, we've just played a pretty spot-on recreation of Final Fantasy VII's opening, which you're probably already familiar with, but essentially you're thrown into the action as Cloud, an ex-soldier turned mercenary, as he helps the eco-terrorist group Avalanche carry out a bombing run on one of Midgar's Mako reactors. These reactors encircle the plated city and are bleeding the planet's life force dry in order to give the people their energy. This Mako energy is touted by the controlling mega-corporation of Midgar, Shinra Electric Power Company, as being a limitless resource, though that's not really the case.
This pump's sole purpose is to drain the planet dry. While you sleep, while you eat, while you shit, it's here sucking up Mako. It doesn't rest and it doesn't care. You do realize what Mako is, don't you? Mako is the lifeblood of our world. The planet bleeds green like you and me bleed red. The hell you think's gonna happen when it's all gone, huh? Answer me! You gonna stand there and pretend you can't hear the planet crying out in pain? I know you can!
Destroying the reactors is hoped to slow this down, and Avalanche take it into their hands to do so. The group's demolitions expert Jesse has prepared the bomb that will take it out. You set it, dash out just in the nick of time as the reactor explodes dramatically behind you. Same in the remake as it is in the original. The thing is, in both versions, is that the explosion seems to be bigger than expected for some mysterious reason. Not only does the reactor explode, but it devastates the surrounding top plate sector too. The team regroup and Cloud has to accompany them back to their base to get paid. They split up, aiming to meet again at the train station. Again, that's the same. But in the original game, the post-bombing section is limited to just a couple of screens. Cloud meets Aerith, there's some blocky NPCs running back and forth in a sort of pantomime of panic. You fight a few groups of security guards and jump aboard the train. From this top-down small slice of city, it's really hard to get a sense of the impact that the bombing has had. You're just kind of told it. But in Remake, this is expanded massively into the full-on Chapter 2. Cloud's journey to try to reach the train isn't just longer, but more dense with things to look at. As he begins to make his way through some of the devastation, he eavesdrops on panicking citizens, scared because they're not sure where their loved ones are. Some don't know where they need to go to take shelter. Within this realistic scale of disaster, you have to interact with it and are forced to properly take it in. People are injured, buildings and vehicles ruined.
Multiple explosions have been confirmed, as well as ongoing fire. In response, a disaster warning has been issued.
We need to get out of here.
But we don't know where to shelter. Structures and
Then later on, when you have to cut through some guards to make a more dramatic escape, even some of them seem rattled by the situation, as they should be. As well as our heroes and the regular people of Midgar, the game is also frequently quick to remind us that Shinra's security are also normal people, most of them scooped up from the slums with the promise of a better life. They live here too, and they're caught up in something bigger, just like everyone else in Midgar.
What a mess.
I repeat,
My friend
this is an alert from the Shinra Emergency Operations Center. An evacuation order has been issued to the occupants building.
Playing through Chapter 2, you have no choice but to be met with the stakes involved in the battle between Avalanche and Shinra for everybody, especially the normal people. It's beyond just anime good versus evil, though it revels in plenty of those kind of moments too. Remake always has this feeling of consequence. Even when you do eventually manage to regroup at the Sector 7 slums in the Undercity, you have to walk through groups of people with their own unique worries about the bombing even there. Where you can still talk to some people directly, the eavesdropping style dialogue replaces the standard walk up to and talk dialogue you get in old school RPGs, meaning you get a similar experience but dynamically fed to you as you wander around these locations. It immerses you in the believability of this fantasy world. It might be a fantasy, but it hits close to home, and Remake might be the first Final Fantasy to really capitalize on the small scale effects in this way. But this is more than a one-time trick just for that initial bombing. It's one of the main ways Remake expands upon the original FF7 story. When you get to areas with side quests, you spend time exploring the settlements, not only learning a bit more about the area by doing the quests themselves, getting familiar with the layout, but moving through those also gets you to eavesdrop on conversations as you walk around for them.
Look, I'm involved in things.
Later on, when you undertake actions that impact regular people, like having to switch off the artificial sunlighting to free up power to progress through a dungeon, you feel the impact more for having grown closer to them. You get a sense of how that will actually affect them and what you're actually doing. Another early chapter elaborates more on some of the topside residents again, when you get to see a slice of a sleepy suburb complete with cars and driveways and a little park play area. This is where Jesse's parents live, and by getting a peek into their house you get a sense of that normalcy. Hiya folks, Oscar from the future here. It's been brought to my attention that apparently this word is pronounced normalcy and not normalcy, which is what I thought was correct my entire life up until now. I thought about stealthily replacing it, so I'm saying normalcy, but I kind of like normalcy. I know it's not correct, but I kind of like it. Draw your own conclusions, is all I'm saying. On one hand, you get to see how Shinra's Mako farming methods can adversely affect people in the current status quo, as thanks to the Mako-flavoured radiation poisoning, Jesse's father is comatose. But you also get a sense of how this normal life is comfortable for people in the houses next door. It might be bleeding the planet dry, but if you really did destroy all the reactors and take away the power source for this massive city, it will upend a lot of lives. People won't be thankful for that, and that's what Shinra in part relies on. As President Shinra is all too aware, there's no good answer for this in the game, and it hangs over your actions the entire way through.
Well, most people would say something sweet right about now.
I'm sure they would.
Using media, Shinra controls the message and hides the fact that the planet's energy might be depleting. They paint Avalanche's actions as being terrorists on the same side as Wutai, a country Midgar was recently at war with, who we don't really get to see much of in this game. When this group's actions are broadcast on the news as they attempt to sabotage the second Mako reactor, we even get to see distraught citizens in the background of the news report. There are real lives at stake, and no easy answers for our party of heroes, and you feel that worry of regular people from beginning to end. Later on in the game, this really comes full circle when the Sector 7 plate is about to be dropped by Shinra, framing Avalanche for the attack. It's an event that has impact in the original, but we only get to see it through a fairly basic sequence as Cloud battles his way up the pillar trying to stop at the last moment. We get that again here, but we also have a brand new sequence where Aerith has to go into the Sector 7 slums itself to rescue Marlene, something we only got told about as happening off screen in the original. We really get to feel like we're diving directly into that moment for ourselves. Not only one of the biggest moments in the Midgar section of the story, but when you break it down, one of the biggest moments in Final Fantasy VII in general.
The big boy!
Now, playing as Aerith, we have to work our way through the maze of streets, picking a way through to avoid the destruction as flames engulf the settlement and the threat of the plate falling looms ever above. People are scared trying to evacuate. It's a pretty powerful moment, made all the more so if you have context of the original and you know that that doom is coming. Though thanks to an early game flash forward, Cloud seems to know this is due to happen as well, which is interesting, but more of a lore thing than I really want to get into. After this sequence, you even get to go back to the Sector 7 slums, walking past the evacuation stragglers as the after effects of the destruction still shake the tunnels, joining Barrett as he looks for survivors, already knowing it might be a fruitless effort. And you really get to take in the destruction of this place that people, real people called home, that you interacted with.
I'm sorry, but
Don't.
And as the game draws into its lengthy and pretty spectacular conclusion, the gang must ascend from the Undercity to the central Shinra building, and they do so by climbing up much of that wreckage from the plate falling, picking their way over the devastation that also befell the top side of Sector 7, which is something you really don't get much of a sense of in the original, though of course even the top side of Sector 7 would be devastated as well. After all, they didn't even have the forewarning you provided the Undercity as you tried to battle through to stop it. For them, the ground just suddenly fell out from beneath their feet. So many of the inhabitants of Midgar just want to live their lives. They don't want to be drawn into this conflict, though inevitably they must, whether topside dwellers, those who live in the Undercity, or Shinra's staff themselves. For them, the stakes are high, deadly, and literally world-shattering, as Barrett reminds us as we work our way up to the top for that final confrontation.
No.
Don't you ever forget this view.
Remake's dedication to bringing us closer to Midgar in that realistic scale means we can't look away from these massive stakes. The view into the lives of the regular people of Midgar won't be something easily forgotten, and it adds so much to those down-to-earth moments in what could easily have been simply another grandiose planet-saving battle. After all, in Final Fantasy VII Remake, there always feels like a reason that that planet needs to be saved. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and boy, Final Fantasy VII Remake, what a special experience. So great to see these characters remade like this, and I'm not going to get into the story stuff, but some big things in there, huh? some big things. Just wanted to kind of touch on some of my favorite aspects of the remake and how they changed it up, and share it with you. Stick around for maybe some more videos on this kind of thing, not necessarily about Final Fantasy, and have a good one.